Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game and really admires Gareth Southgate's cunning plan to come second in the group. I'm Kevin Day and here's Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, I have to say I'm still slightly hoarse from shouting, "Get in the box" at Harry Kane. I think all this talk of him being a midfield playmaker has gone to his head. Kieran, it's an exciting day for both of us, actually, because it's the longest day,
yes,
which is handy because we've got quite a long pod. Obviously, I'm a big fan of the longest day because it means we've broken the back of summer, Kieran. The nights will start to get darker and just have to get July and August out of the way, and suddenly we're in September and it's nearly Christmas and I can smile and be happy again. And even more importantly, Kieran, you've got an updated mind map.
Yes, they've updated the software, so I've got new combinations of colours and routines. So I've been in geek heaven all morning, researching for today's show. My life gets no more rock and roll than this, Kevin. No more rock and roll.
I just think I'm sure the listeners won't mind me saying there's a little insight into our relationship. Is when we logged on this morning, the first thing I said was, "You hadn't even said anything," and I've said, "You sound chipper." he's breathing more happily than he has been for a while. And he actually said, "Did he say good morning? How are you?" I've got an updated mind map. Hey! It's Questions Day, Kieran, on the longest day. Goodbye, summer. But we do have a couple of stories to discuss first, and the first of that is us, basically. As we've had an email from the communications director at the EFL, a very nice, pleasant email, I have to say, as you'd expect. And the communications director at the EFL asked if we have a number for Swiss Ramble. Once we got past that, they asked in a very friendly manner if they could clarify one or two things following our chat when Trevor Birch said that he wanted to scrap parachute payments. We discussed that recently. And the email points out that sustainability for the future would be better provided by pooling the net media revenue of the Premier League and EFL, with the EFL getting 25%, and removing parachute payments would prevent continued irrational behaviour. And talking about effective cost control, the EFL told us, "We absolutely agree," and that's a quote, "we absolutely agree that we can't increase income and then spend it on transfer fees, agent fees and additional wages." Now, I think that's fairly close to what we actually said at the time, and we're now in talks with the EFL about getting someone to come on and talk to us in general. But in the meantime, Kieran, your comments on the clarifications they asked for?
Well, it does seem to repeat the comments from Trevor Birch. I've said all along that if we reduce the gaps between divisions, then parachute payments automatically disappear. But at present, what the EFL appear to be saying to the Premier League is, if you give us 25% of your money from the TV deal, problem solved. And from the Premier League's point of view, I guess they're saying, well, okay, what do we get in return? Yeah. You know, if you go to Ricky Gervais and say, "Ricky, can I have 25% of your income because I'm also a comedian?" What's he going to do?
Make a sarcastic comment. Open his eyes wide at the camera. Tell me about animals being killed. Which is not fair, actually. Ricky's a very, very nice chap, by the way. What I found, I can't stress enough, it was a very friendly email. I won't name the communications director because that probably wouldn't be fair to him, but it was a very friendly email, and he just said he loved the pod, and I'm putting words in his mouth there, but I'm sure that's what he meant to imply. But the phrase that leapt out at me was preventing continued irrational behaviour, because it seems to imply that the only way to prevent continued irrational behaviour is to give clubs in the EFL less money, some of them, and then they won't be irrational with it, essentially, because we're talking about if we do give them money, we can't let them increase income, spend it on transfer fees, agent fees, additional wages, etc. And it seems to me that the EFL as an organisation actually has a very difficult job reining in clubs and club owners that are going to behave irrationally, regardless of what you do for them.
Yes, yeah, and it is a genuine challenge. I think the rationale behind the argument, and I do have sympathy with this, is that if clubs are coming down with the benefit of parachute payments, then that creates an arms race, but from other clubs in the Championship who want to get promoted. And there is logic in that, but it's got to be done on a universal basis. If we're going to give money from the clubs in the Premier League to the clubs in the Championship, then perhaps the EFL needs to look at the distribution of revenues in the EFL itself, because that creates exactly the same issue. 80% of the EFL's broadcast revenue goes to clubs in the Championship and just 12% to clubs in League One. So that creates an arms race in League One for clubs that want to go up. And also, of course, the EFL itself has parachute payments when clubs get relegated. So it's no point saying if we just stop parachute payments from the Premier League to the Championship, if we're going to have that within the EFL. And of course, there are parachute payments from the EFL to clubs that get relegated to the National League, and it used to be for 1 year, and then I think the EFL extended that to 2 years. Now that was down to the owners voting to change the rules, the owners of clubs in the EFL, and I was talking to a chief executive of a League Two club 2 or 3 days ago, and he said his club was relegated to the National League, and that without the parachute payments, they would be in real danger of going out of business. Right. And that's the purpose of the parachute. So, do I think they're too much? Yes. When we had this discussion, what's the purpose of a parachute? It's to stop you from crashing on the rocks below when you jump from a high height. I know some people have suggested, well, we'll just have mandatory wage cuts. But I think from a contract law point of view, what happens if you're a club such as Stoke City who get relegated and they say, well, our owners are quite happy to continue to pay the same level of wages as before, and we don't want the deals that we sign when we're in the Premier League to have 80 or 90% wage relegation clauses, because it affects our ability to compete in the Premier League. So I think we need to look at it on a broader scale. Why is it that we've effectively got parachute payments for those clubs that qualify for the Champions League? They call them something different. They call them 5 and 10 year coefficients. But the gap between the big 6 and the other 14 in the Premier League is just a bigger problem as the gap between the bottom of the Premier League and the top half of the Championship. So, I'm in favour. And the reason why, I'll be honest here, the reason why historically there's been a bit of a testy relationship with the EFL is that Rick Parry has described me as having no talent, and the finance director described me as a troublemaker. Now, under those circumstances, am I going to go and reach out and try to be best bezies?
It's absolutely outrageous to describe.
No, it's not outrageous. Yeah, it's opinion. I've no issue with that.
It's out, Kieran. If you just hear me out,
sorry,
Kieran, with my opinion, Kieran. It's absolutely outrageous to suggest you have no talent, to suggest you can be a bit of a troublemaker. That's an opinion that I know people all around the world might get on board with, mainly FIFA cartel members, mafia members, Blackpool nightclub goers, all sorts of people. Yes, I know your relationship with the EFL has been a problematic one, Kieran, but which is why I was really quite pleased that we had that email from the EFL. We now have a direct line of communication with them. And of course, they have the best interests of every club in the EFL at heart and wish to ensure their continued survival. So with any luck, if we will get somebody from the EFL, but I'm guessing it probably won't be Rick Parry. And if it is, that'll be an interview we might have to get producer Guy in to do. Rick Parry strikes me as the sort of person who would say, I'm not talking to those monkeys. I want the actual organ grinder. And then we'll
he's not a fan of Crystal Palace's Steve Parish either, is he?
No, he's not a fan of Crystal Palace. No, not having Rick Parry on. I don't care how friendly the EFL been. That's it. Putting my foot down now, Kieran. You've talked me into it, you troublemaker. Two stories are related, Kieran. One of which created more interest than I suspect the club involved would have thought it would do. Firstly, Jamie Vardy has bought a minority stake in the US side Rochester Rhinos, who I believe are all but defunct, aren't they?
Yes, Rochester Rhinos is a franchise which was bought by the Dworkin family in 2016, and they've played in the USL, which is effectively sort of the third division of American football or American soccer, as they probably describe it over there. When they last played, crowds had diminished to around about 2,000. This was on the back of a stadium move which hadn't gone down well with fans, mainly due to the fact that it was in an area of town which, for want of a better phrase, was a glorified crack den. Burnt down buildings, sort of shuttered up residential property. It wasn't a celebratory area to watch football. So crowds had diminished. The club had been losing a lot of money, but this family, the Dworkins, who are part owners of an NBA franchise, they are trying to get the Rochester Rhinos to start off again in 2022. And Jamie Vardy, I think through his agent as well, they've been in communication, and now they have become part owners with a view to kickstarting, finding first of all a new location which is more amenable, more family friendly, and I think that's intriguing. Jamie Vardy is looking beyond his career as a footballer. He's had a fantastic career. He's one of my favourite players of all time in the Premier League. Simply just because of his enthusiasm for the game. Yeah, and this is one of the options that he's taking up.
Yeah, do we know whether he had previous links with Rochester or the Rhinos, or...?
No, none at all. I think he had been looking to sort of expand his portfolio of sort of post retirement interests, and he liked the cut of the jib of the Rochester Rhinos, in the sense that it's a working class area. He's proud of his Sheffield roots. He's proud of the fact that you don't tend to see Jamie Vardy with a cocktail with a with all the nonsense in it. He prefers a pint, and he is sort of very down to earth, and he felt that the values of the club effectively tied in with him.
Yeah, he's a brilliant footballer, and he's got that Ian Wright vibe about him, because the genius has never been trained out of him, basically. But he does look at you the way a seagull looks at a chip. He's a slightly disconcerting man to be in the room with. The first thing Jamie Vardy needs to do, if he has any influence in the Rochester Rhinos, is to change the bloody name. Because I've been to that part of the world, and it's not famous for its Rhino. I would have gone Rochester Rockets myself, but it's just slightly confusing. But on a similar note, and this is a story that has driven a lot of interest, especially on Twitter, because former US international Landon Donovan is joining Lincoln City as a strategic advisor as part of a new investment deal. Randy Eshelman, who's Randy with a Y on Twitter, is one of many people who asked how that can happen when Donovan is already part of the ownership group at Swansea.
It's because of a different role. If he is an advisor as opposed to a shareholder, then, as far as I can make out, there would be no breach of the rules. Effectively, if you own, I think if you own more than 10% of more than one club, then there is a potential conflict of interest. We're seeing this in Italy at present, where a club's just been promoted, where the owner of the club also has an interest in Lazio, and now that they're both in Serie A, it looks like he might have to sell. And there's talk about the Leeds United owner Radrizzani potentially acquiring a stake in one of those clubs, and not the Lazio one. It's intriguing stuff from Lincoln. Lincoln, is in my view, they're one of my 5-star clubs. Very progressive outlook, really fantastic engagement with fans, and they have taken on additional investment from the US. I'll be honest. I have regular WhatsApp conversations with people from Lincoln, and I'm always very impressed at their forward-looking strategy. They want to get into the championship and then see how things go from there. And they're doing the right thing: infrastructure building, making the club more available more often to fans and other people, and on the back of that. That gives them greater resources from which to put together a competitive squad to allow them to chase promotion.
And when we're told it's part of a new investment deal that he's been brought in as strategic advisor, does that mean that the new investors have said, well, we will put money in, but we want this guy to come in and maybe keep an eye on how it's being spent?
Yes, and it's always useful to have eyes and ears at board level, at discussion level, especially if your background is one which is unfamiliar with the day-to-day operations of a football club, which is, whilst it has some consistencies with other businesses, it's also unique in so many ways because the objective of most organisations is to achieve financial success and fiduciary rewards for shareholders. Whereas for a football club, the objectives can be different because, as we've always said, it's far more of a social, far more of a broader issue.
Yes, it's all very well for you to say eyes and ears. You know what your Uncle Terry would say? Grass. That's what Uncle Terry would say. And our final news story before we get into some very interesting questions this week. Tottenham have paid back their £175 million loan to the Bank of England, which it says here, because I wrote it, puts them in a position to complete the new contract for Son Heung-min, which begs the question, how much are they paying Son Heung-min?
Yes. Well, if we take a look at the conditions laid down by the Bank of England under the COVID lending facilities, it's that if money is advanced to a company, it cannot be used to increase senior pay. Or the pay of senior staff. Now, right. I would suggest that Son Heung-min is one of the top 2 or 3 paid employees within the playing staff at Spurs, and clearly he's a player that they want to hold on to. A, he's a good player. B, from a marketing perspective, he's worth an absolute fortune given his popularity back in his home country. I've been to Spurs, and I think you have, and the number of people that from Asia who come out from the megastore with their Son shirts is phenomenal. So you can see the benefits of that. So it's what Spurs have effectively done is that they're repaid the Bank of England loan, which is at 0.5%, and they will be borrowing, and they've issued what's referred to as loan notes, which is what the finance community call IOUs, and they're paid at around about 2.5% interest. So there will be an increase in the interest or finance costs of the club, but it will allow them more flexibility in terms of their ability to negotiate with key employees.
So basically, we have talked before, as you said, the Bank of England COVID loans, or whatever you call them, have got conditions on. But if they borrow the money from anywhere else, then they can pretty much do what they want with it. Yes,
I mean, there will always be some form of covenants with any lending arrangement from a corporate perspective. It's to stop Daniel Levy going down to the local newsagent and putting all the lot on scratch cards, which appears to be the sort of rather scattergun approach which they've got to recruiting a manager at present. there will be covenants, but they are far less onerous than what we've seen in terms of the Bank of England. Those loans, and Arsenal have repaid theirs, remember, as well, were specifically for companies who make a significant contribution to the economy and need it for what's referred to as working capital, i.e. paying the sort of the day-to-day bills.
Right.
I think Spurs now feel that they want more of a longer-term loan arrangement, and for that they've gone to the private sector.
Okay, Kieran, it's questions time, and our first one comes from Ian McLaren. Ian says that he was just wondering why owners allow their clubs to go into administration. It would seem that many owners are expecting a big boost in income from somewhere to save their clubs, or they are busy not paying wages or tax bills. What is this pot of gold they are waiting for? It's a fair point, Kieran. It's something we've discussed before, but that sort of magic wand, it'll be all right attitude does seem quite common in English football, doesn't it?
Yes, well, the reason why I think it's a hangover from when it actually used to work. When clubs had significant liabilities, putting the club into administration was a bit like what we used to see in Men in Black, where it would effectively get rid of all the history, get rid of all the memories, and what you were left with was the ability to buy the assets from the administrator. Quite often, you could buy those quite cheaply in what was referred to as a pre-pack arrangement, and all of the creditors got stuffed. And then, to be fair, you give credit to both the Premier League and the EFL. They said this is not acceptable, and that's why now, unless football creditors are repaid 100% and unsecured creditors are repaid a minimum of 25%, there are automatic points deductions. You do get a points deduction if you go into administration as well. So there's both input and export points deductions. The benefits was simply that you could turn one over on your creditors, and then there's little that they could do about it. And certainly, from somebody that used to work in the insolvency business, this was always something I've felt a little bit uncomfortable with. But if the company had been poorly run, one of the things you're always trying to do is to preserve the company, to preserve jobs. So it was always sort of a moral and ethical challenge when dealing with the nature of these deals. It's
probably 20 years ago now, Kieran, scarily, but there was a spate, wasn't there, over 2 seasons of the season ending, and 3 or 4 clubs went into administration after the season finished. To do exactly that. And that's one of the reasons the points deduction was brought in, wasn't it? To stop clubs just taking advantage of that system where they could, close the club and then come back as Melchester Rovers is gone, but Melchester Rovers 1998 is back. So that's exactly why that was done, to prevent that unhappiness for creditors who owed that sort of money. And most of those creditors as well weren't big organisations, were they? They were local printers and St John's Ambulance and people like that.
Yes, and the reason for that is there's 2 types of creditors. There's what's referred to as a secured creditor, who effectively have a mortgage over some of the assets of the club or the business, and that means that they get first dibs. And until they are repaid 100% of what is owed to them, the unsecured creditors, which is the people that you were referring to, the local suppliers, the local coach company that transport the players to away matches, the pie suppliers, the St John's Ambulance, they often ended up with nothing or next to nothing as a result of some club owners. Now, sometimes it was just genuine bad luck at the club. Some club owners, mentioning no names, I'll mention those names to you after the show, played the system like a piano and got benefits on the back of that.
Yeah, you could see when I was struggling to name a club, and it eventually came up with Melchester Rovers, that I had the words of Guy ringing in my ears saying, "Stop saying things out loud. We're going to get sued." Just wait for Kieran to tell you off air. Mark Strong has a question about a topic that's been troubling us for some time now, which is gambling sponsorship in football. And Mark says, with the government seemingly trying to stop the sponsorship of gambling companies in football, especially on shirt fronts, would clubs like my team, Coventry, be due a refund if this did happen?
if it is brought in the form of legislation, the answer is no, or highly unlikely. But I suspect that if it is brought in the form of legislation, what will happen in terms of front of shirt sponsorship is that there will be a cooling off period, which will allow football clubs who have existing deals to taper those deals through to their natural expiry date. So I think that would possibly be one consideration. I did speak last week to the fan-led review panel who are looking into issues in respect of sponsorship, and I was there are about 8 or 9 people on the panel who were grilling me, and the issue of gambling sponsorship did arise. And I was asked to go away and to crunch some numbers. I mean, I estimate that the big four gambling companies. So we're looking at Ladbroke Coral, Bet365, William Hill, and Flutter, which I think is Paddy Power and Betway.
Yeah.
Between them, they're bringing in over £200 billion a year.
Wow.
In the form of gross wages. Now they will say, and rightly so, that some of that money is recycled. So if you put a bet on £100 and it comes in and you get £500 back, and then you go and I believe the word the Prime Minister uses is spaff all of that money on another bet and lose, then the total wages is £600 because it's 100 plus 500. So they will say, well, that perhaps those numbers are a bit inflated, but that is the total value of the wages based on the data I could see. So gambling is a big industry. It provides a lot of employment. It provides a lot of enjoyment for people as well. So where are we with regards to the industry? It's an uncomfortable position because it's also an industry that, rightly or wrongly, results in domestic violence, bankruptcy, suicide, and is enough being done to deal with problem gamblers. Again, the industry will say, well, we're spending £100 million a year on dealing with problem gambling. That's what the chief executive of or Denise Coates at Bet365, that's what she earns in 12 weeks. So is it a lot of money? Yes. Is it enough money? Well, compared to the total marketing spend, possibly not. And it's a case of getting it right on the dial. I'm not in favour of prohibition. I can see no logic to it because it's an industry and we live in a country of choices. But the somewhat insidious way that the industry markets itself, especially with the emphasis on trying to get you to move away from betting on football to which is where you could potentially make a profit, to move towards what they refer to as the free spins, where i.e. the online casinos, where the odds are fixed, and the odds are very much fixed in favour of the gambling institution itself. So it's I think an adult discussion needs to be made. But in terms of a refund, going back to Mark's question, I can't see it.
Yeah, to be fair to the gambling industry, Kieran, I don't think there's anything more likely to make a helpless gambling addict think twice than Jeff Stelling saying, if the fun stops, stop, basically, which is pretty much the limit of their attempts to make people think about what they're doing with their money. I was going to introduce the topic of you talking to the Inquirer, and I got confused. You may have heard a slight noise here, Kieran, as I was being cross, and the Smudge decided she was going to walk across the keyboard. She's fascinated by the sound of your voice. And then I got slightly worried. I don't see why it could happen, but then I got slightly worried that Finlay would hear that there was a cat at my end, and then he'd get busy because he likes to get busy.
He doesn't wear headphones, unlike me, when we're recording the show.
Well, he's a clever enough dog to wear headphones, I imagine. And Smudge, can you get off the next question? Thank you. I was going to introduce the subject of your appearing before the committee later on in the form of a very clever question. I was going to say the next question comes from Kevin Day, who says, "I understand." Tell us a little bit more about the committee you did appear in front of, Kieran, and maybe a couple of the other big topics that came up in that discussion.
Well, as people may be aware, the government has accelerated its manifesto commitment to a fan-led review of football in the aftermath of the Super League event, which has gone very quiet, by the way. But
Yes,
remember, three clubs are still in Super League. Yeah. So it's being chaired by Tracy Crouch, who's the former sports minister, who I think, if I get it correct, she resigned over the government's reticence to stop having fixed odds terminals in gambling in gambling establishments, which you could bet up to £100 on these. So,
a time, yeah.
So she's certainly a person of principle, and I was asked to sort of discuss issues in terms of the distribution of money, the issues of parachute payments, going back to our earlier discussion with the EFL, and I effectively said things along similar lines. Clark Carlisle was there, who's the former chief executive of the EFL. Yes. There were people who have connections with clubs. There are people from the world of finance themselves. So they sort of asked a variety of questions, and I nerded out with a series of charts.
Did you? Is your instinct, Kieran, having appeared before this committee again, and it's something you've done on a regular basis recently, but is your instinct that the government is genuinely interested in making football more democratic, or do you think it is a hasty response to the Super League in an attempt to get votes at the next election?
I think the government has seen the extent of feeling after Super League. And has reacted accordingly. There was a mysterious meeting between the Prime Minister and Ed Woodward about 4 or 5 days before the announcement of Super League. Now, depending upon people's political persuasions and which newspapers they read, some newspapers have intimated that the Prime Minister was in favour of Super League following his chat with Ed Woodward, and then when he saw the weight of popular opinion, changed his mind. So that's sort of the cynic in me sort of says, well, if I was Prime Minister, I'd go with the flow, and that's politics. Certainly, Tracy Crouch is a commitment politician. So she is looking at the broader issue. She's a football fan herself, and I don't think that she will just go through the tokenism route. Certainly, in respect of one of the other issues that was discussed, which was should football be left to a situation of self-regulation or some form of independent commissioner. She was. I think she's open to listen to suggestions from all of the people that are contributing. And after I spoke, I think it was Portsmouth. There was people from Portsmouth talking to her, and then people from Bolton Wanderers, both of whom, of course, of clubs who have had fairly traumatic experiences with a series of owners whose interests were not in the interest of the football club, and certainly not in the interest of the fan base.
Yeah, I think our Prime Minister would only be too happy to go with the flow, but he's just married the Carrie, so he might give it a couple of weeks yet. Tom Holliday read an article saying that Barcelona will have to pay Lionel Messi 38 million euros as a loyalty bonus, even if he leaves the club. As Tom rightly points out, this doesn't seem very loyal. And Tom also wonders if loyalty bonuses are amortisation in a different name and in a creative way to get around financial rules. And I noticed that Tom obviously has the same problem that I had with my keyboard, because he spelt the word euros rather than using the symbol. Because it's confusing. The number 2 key has got the @ symbol and the euro symbol. Use the Alt key, Tom. I found that out yesterday.
Yeah, that's the secret.
I wish I'd asked Ali 3 years ago now, because it's just, it was good old-fashioned eyebrow-raising time when I went, here's a good question, Ali. And also, this bloke can't use the euro symbol. How do I do? Why have they got 2 symbols on the 2 key? Is it because there's 2 symbols on it? Well, there's the 3 symbol hasn't got 3 keys on it, is it? Use Alt. Then she goes, use Alt. I said, what do you mean use Alt? Well, press Alt the same way you'd press the up button. And no, I can't. Well, at the same time? No, by which time I should have just printed the word euro. It's already been much quicker. But anyway, it's an interesting question from Tom, because you've got a lot of our listeners paranoid now that every football club does is amortisation in a different name.
Right. A big question though: is the plural of euro or euros?
Oh, that's a good question to distract me for the next 10 minutes.
Yes.
Do you know, that's really interesting, because in Ireland they always say euro, so we say 38 million euro.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
And I write exam questions, and I always use the singular. I don't put an S on it, and that came from the whoever is in charge of me. I've forgotten they are.
Troublemaker, you say?
Yes. Yeah, I did it with an S at the end, and was taken to task about that.
Yeah, I can just imagine you being called into an office going, "You're not the boss of me," and they go, "Yes, I am." That's exactly how. Hello, Finley's back. Tell Finley
is back.
Tell Finley to stop slamming that door.
Right, on to Mark's question.
Tom's question.
The structure
Tom,
of...
This is Tom. Mark was last.
Sorry,
question.
so on to Mark's question. Tom's question.
And you've got a new mind map as
Euro
well,
and Euros, but not between Mark and Tom.
You're getting used to Finley. Finley's got the hump today, isn't he? Finley's doing some proper door slamming.
Yeah, he wandered in with a wonky chomp.
Oh, okay.
To show me, and because I wasn't willing to chase him around the room with it, he's now buggered off into another room to go and take it up with the Baroness.
Oh, your ears will be burning now, won't they? They'll both be talking about you now. In his new mind map.
Exactly. So back to Tom's position. The nature of an individual deal with a player can get incredibly complicated, especially when you're dealing with a multi-million-pound employee such as Lionel Messi. Now, Barcelona will not have charged a cent or a euro in amortization with regards to Lionel Messi, because he was recruited as a young player, and therefore they didn't have to go and pay for his initial registration. But I think in terms of the end of season bonus, this, as much as anything else, has got to do with cash flows. So one of the concerns that football clubs have is that for an organisation such as UEFA, it tends to make payments a sort of a couple of times during the season. And given that Barcelona could be in receipt of anything up to 100, 110 million euro in a single season, depending upon how far you progress. Sometimes it's that money's normally given out by UEFA at the end of the season. So therefore, if they get a large amount of money coming in, then you can say, well, Lionel Messi, we're going to pay you €1 million a month for 11 months. And then in the 12th month, when the money comes in from UEFA, we will give you your bonus. So it's just actually one for smoothing out cash inflows and outflows rather than to do with amortization. So I can't see that money being spread over a number of years, given that he's effectively at the end of his contract. Is it at the 30th of June? He's still not signed a new contract from what I can make out.
I believe not. Our next question, Kieran, comes from George Darling. And I can't apologise enough to George Darling that I spent a very happy 2 minutes pretending I was in Blackadder.
I did exactly the same.
It's just when I wrote this. And I will go to my grave arguing that the last episode of the last series of Blackadder is one of the finest things ever written.
I agree. It was so moving, so poignant.
Yes.
And he must... I mean, I just like to sympathise with George because Captain Darling's constant response from Blackadder was one of the greatest things, which had me like chortling like a 6-year-old every single time I heard it, and he must have heard it thousands of times since then.
Yes, apologies for that, George. I'm very sorry, but George says, can you explain in everyman terms how consortia such as ALK and Madrox are able to buy clubs like Burnley and Sunderland with what seems to be the club's own money, even securing loans against the stadium and training grounds of a club they don't yet own? And why do governing bodies allow it? So basically what George is asking, Kieran, is a simple description of a leveraged buyout. And I don't blame him, because I still struggle with the actual concept. I mean, I can't go to the bank and say I'd like to buy one of producer guy's smaller houses, and the bank says, have you got £4 million? And I say no, but I will have when I own the house. But that's essentially what's happening here, isn't it? In this, and we use this phrase leverage buyout, and I go, oh yeah, okay, I understand, but I still don't get how the Glazers got Man United, and as George said, Burnley and Sunderland acquired in the same way.
Well, leverage buyout, it's the equivalent of getting a 100% mortgage when you buy a house. So, if I go back to when I bought my first house, which was in the 80s, I didn't have any money at the time. Right. I had a few quid. I had enough quid to go and pay the solicitor and pay for the stamp duty and so on, but bugger all else. And I took out a 100% mortgage, and this is the route that the Glazers have taken. I don't really think it's quite the same with Sunderland as far as what's happened there. That Stuart Donald appears to be using some of the parachute payments to pay the former owner. So it's a little bit more complex with Sunderland, but Burnley have taken the leverage buyout route. First of all, it's legal. And going back to one of our previous discussions, this was also one of the things I was asked about with regards to the fan-led review. Should LBOs be allowed in the football environment? As far as Manchester United are concerned, they have spent £830 million paying interest on the loans that the Glazer company, the Glazer family acquired in 2005. Some people would argue that money may have been better spent on, first of all, making Old Trafford a bit more modern, getting rid of the leaks in the roof, and secondly, investing more on the playing squad. So and that's an argument which you can see the viewpoints of Manchester United fans. Ultimately, if the owners of Premier League clubs and EFL clubs want to prevent LBOs taking place, all they have to do is to put that forward as a proposal to meeting and vote on it.
Right, so this is, again, one of the things I don't understand, Kieran, and I know that's my role on this pod, but if Burnley, if the owners of Burnley before the leveraged buyout, if they didn't want to sell the club, is this an excuse for an aggressive takeover, whether the previous owners want it or not? Or do they still have to say, no, you can buy the club, but it has to be on a leveraged buyout basis?
Well, I mean, that you could lay that down as a condition, but again, if we go back to sort of the analogy of a house transaction, if you are selling your house, do you give a flying one as to how the person buying your house is going to fund it? Whether they're taking out a mortgage, whether they're putting down cash. So long as you get your cash from selling the house, that's all that matters. Well, I think that's the attitude which is taken by the seller of the football club.
But only if I want to sell the house. If I didn't want to sell the house and I found that somebody was still buying my house using the value of my house, I think I might be a bit cross. But that's not the concept we're talking about here, is it?
No. Okay. In the case of an LBO, the LBO is the funding model. The decision to sell is between, I think it was Mike Garlick and the other directors of Burnley. They chose to sell to ALK, and then as far as how ALK funded the deal, that's something we don't necessarily want to get involved with. But they could have, if they had so chosen, put some form of covenant in that to insist that it can only be acquired via a certain route. But why do that? Because if it doesn't matter what you're selling, if you're selling your company, your house, your car, your dog, your children, whatever it happens to be, then you're just trying to maximize your return. And so why reduce the pool of people who potentially are going to be able to buy the company by putting in constraints on the method they use? If ALK are as successful as they believe they will be, then the interest cost will be more than covered by additional revenues.
Okay, we still have a few questions to go, Kieran, so we probably need to spend less time discussing sitcoms and door-opening dogs. The next, although I hope Finley didn't hear you mention selling your dog there, because I was expecting a massive slam. Simon Barnard has a wonderful sliding doors moment type question. Simon says 20-odd years ago, Gillingham beat Wigan in the dying minutes of the League One playoff final. They then spent 5 years in the Championship before being relegated back to League One, but with relatively balanced books. Wigan, meanwhile, eventually went into the Premier League before being relegated back to League One in a financial mire. Which path would you choose for your club, and which club is now worth more, including real estate?
Right. If we answer these questions in turn, would I have preferred, was it 7 years in the Premier League and winning the FA Cup to 15 years in League One? Yes, I would. So if we take a look at Wigan, I think we need to look at the Wigan timeline. Wigan under Dave Whelan were a very well-run business, and in fact, the person Wigan had a commercial bank account, and the business partner to Wigan happened to be a very close friend of mine. And he said that without doubt, Dave Whelan was the easiest person to deal with of all the football clubs that he had to manage, because Dave Whelan had the checkbook and he knew exactly how much money was going out every single day. He was sort of old-fashioned manager. He said the only downside was that every time he went up to Wigan to have a chat, Dave Whelan happened to mention that he once played in the FA Cup final and broke his leg. That's a new story to me, of course.
Yeah, the first time I went up to Wigan, I came back about a stone heavier as well, because Dave Whelan insisted I try every single pie they had.
Brilliant.
And then mentioned that he broke his leg playing for the FA Cup final. They used to be one of the best clubs to visit, Wigan. They were an amazingly friendly club. They all were to an extent, but he was a very generous man with his time, and the club were too, which is why I think we were both so upset by what happened to them in recent year.
That's right. So I think Dave Whelan was old school owner, ran the club very well. If you look at the profitability of the club, Wigan didn't do anything daft. When they were then taken over by IEC and Choi Stanley, who then sold the club to Al Young, that's when things started to unravel. Yeah. So, if we're looking at Simon's timeline over 20 years, for 18 years, I'd say that Wigan were run in a textbook way, and then it only takes one owner in a very short time period to completely unravel of that. As far as Gillingham are concerned, their main owner, Paul Scally, does operate a break-even model. It is a club which doesn't try to live beyond its means, and therefore, from a sustainability point of view, I think it's a well-run club. The potential downside is that that's nice and worthy. Sometimes it's nice to have a bit of excitement, but that could of course put the risk of the club's long-term future at breaking point. So they both have merits, but I think Wigan have had a more exciting ride in terms of the value today. If you're acquiring Wigan, it's got a bigger stadium. I think they've now got planning permission for the statue of the administrators as well, so that'd be worth a bit more. Gillingham Stadium hasn't had a lot of infrastructure spend, but from a non-footballing perspective, it probably is more value as a site.
Okay, Dan Jones says that the last January transfer window saw an unusual amount of transfers from the MLS to the Championship. Is this because Brexit-related work permit change make them easier, or are US transfers just as difficult as EU ones now are?
Well, I think Dan's raised a good point here. When the UK was part of the European Union, we had freedom of movement of labour, which meant that recruiting a player from the Netherlands or Portugal or the Czech Republic was exactly the same as recruiting a player from Barnsley or Morecambe or Rochdale. So there was complete flexibility. Because we have now moved to a GBE, governing body endorsement points-based system, the EU is now treated the same as the rest of the world, which means that it's harder to recruit players from the EU because it was already not easy to recruit MLS players. So therefore, relatively, it is a step up from the MLS. Also, players from Africa, the Americas, and so on.
Okay. Gordon Keane, beg your pardon, Gordon Kane. Put in extra letters in there, Gordon. He's not even a Patreon. I'm putting an extra letter.
Was he in Hello?
Was that Gordon Kane? Yes. Yeah. So it was Gordon with an E. That's where the extra E came from. I was imagining that was Gordon K, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. What did I say, Kieran? What did I say about not wasting time talking about?
No, sorry, that's sitcoms. Yes.
Gordon Kane says that, as we've discussed earlier on his pod, big clubs are able to access money through the government and big banks at pretty low interest rates, like 1%, 2%, as we talked earlier. And Gordon says that his assumption is that even if a big club is in debt, their underlying value makes them a safe bet. But we've also talked about other clubs taking on debts at much higher rates, like 10%, so high they actually worsen the financial position of a club. But if those clubs are also supporting the debt with underlying asset value, why can't they get the cheaper loans? Which is a good question. Why aren't we all able to apply for those lovely cheap loans?
Right. Well, in terms of the Bank of England 0.5% COVID loans, one of the key criteria is that you have to have a credit rating, which I think was AA. Right. Now, that means that you are highly unlikely to default on the loan. So that's the benefit. If your credit rating was poorer, then you didn't qualify. If we then take a look at the clubs that have been borrowing, and I think we've seen Southampton borrow at 9.7%. We know that Burnley have borrowed money. Sunderland, Derby County, thought we'd throw them in. They've all borrowed from MSD Holdings, Michael Dell's company. The big issue with respect to those clubs is that I think we can safely say that even though they've had relatively mediocre seasons, it is highly unlikely that either Arsenal or Spurs would be relegated from the Premier League, which means that to a certain extent, they've got guaranteed cash flows coming in from the Premier League. And both of those clubs are also generating 100 million or 100 million pounds plus from ticket sales in terms of matchday income. Southampton, not the case. Southampton are at risk at relegation. Burnley are at risk of relegation, and the potential reduction in cash that increases the risk of the business. Therefore, the way that borrowing works, and when we see this, if you watch daytime TV, you will see lending companies come on, and they'll be quoting eye-watering interest rates. Normally for people who've got a poor credit history. Well, that's what you do. There's an inverse relationship between the rate of interest charged and the security of the company involved.
Right. I actually had some good news the other day about my credit rating, Kieran. My account manager phoned up for one of his usual chats, and in the course of it, he went, by the way, I've got something nice to tell you. My credit ratings have been updated to fine.
Very good.
Yes, I was fine. I had to put the phone down and get some champagne I couldn't afford.
On your credit card?
Of course, on my credit card. I just had enough money for it. We've got a couple of questions to go, Kieran, so let's see if we can not rattle through them because that would be disrespectful, but I think they're questions we can answer quite succinctly. And I'd be really interested in the answer to this one. It's from Joe Haining. And he said that earlier this year, Emma Hayes, addressing rumours that AFC Wimbledon were considering her as manager, said they could absolutely not afford her. Is she right? And how do WSL manager salaries compare generally to their EFL counterparts?
Right. In terms of Chelsea's women's team, they lost quite a lot of money in 2019-20. And that was mainly due to an increase in their costs. Now, Chelsea women's team qualify for what we refer to as a small company, and therefore they don't have to go and show the total wages being paid out. But speaking to some people I know in the WSL, the average salary of a player is £27,000. The top earners in the WSL are now earning £300,000 a year.
Oh, okay. Right.
And I won't name the clubs involved, but I think you can probably guess who they are.
Yeah.
So in terms of Emma Hayesworth, she's been a fantastic coach for Chelsea women, and on the back of that, they've made a lot of progress. They're clearly one of the leading clubs. How would she compare to clubs in the EFL? I suspect that most managers in the Championship are on decent money. I was talking to a press officer from a Championship club who said, "Well, our managers are only on $250,000 a year," right. And was then replaced by another manager who was on £1 million a year. Right. So that's sort of the range you would be looking at in the Championship, plus bonuses, of course, upon promotion. In League One, I think we'd take quite a considerable drop. The total wage bills are often, for the whole club, can often be down to as low as sort of 5 or 6 million, and for clubs. Clubs that run on a really tight ship, they'll be even lower than that. So I think we're probably on a par with some of the better paid clubs in League One, would be my assessment. Mm-hmm. And that's not a criticism of Wimbledon. That they've got a fairly strict budget, and they stick to it because they're a fan-owned club.
Yeah. Our penultimate question, Kieran, comes from Nick Pooley. Nick says that in recent pods you've mentioned that Everton had sold the rights to their training ground, Finch Farm, for a lot of money. How is that different to Wednesday, Villa, and you-know-who from the East Midlands selling their grounds to their owners? Surely it's aimed at doing the same thing those clubs did, which is increasing revenue against the rules.
It is exactly the same, and also those stadium sales are not against the rules. The rules were changed in 2016 in both the Premier League and the EFL to allow stadium sales to be counted, or rather the profits of stadium sales to be counted for financial fair play purposes. It's not allowed for UEFA. Under UEFA rules, when doing an assessment when clubs qualify for the Champions League, Europa League, and the Conference. I sort of did an investigation into this, because to me it seems intuitively wrong. We've said that football stadium should be protected assets. Yep. From a sustainability point of view, and allowing sales reduces that closeness. But when I did have a chat with somebody reasonably senior, they said, "Yeah, we know it's a bit daft. It was cock up rather than conspiracy. There wasn't at the time an intention to change it. I think it was just poor wording. Right. And since then, clubs have seized upon it. And I think the viewpoint now is that if we're going to allow clubs such as Sheffield Wednesday, Reading, Villa, Birmingham, and a club whose name I've forgotten from the East Midlands to sell their stadium, isn't it harsh if we deny it to other clubs in those divisions as well? So that's the position we find ourselves in. Going back to the issue at Everton, you are allowed to do it per the rules. The key issue is, has the sale been at a fair value? Has it been at a market price? Mm. And the EFL did charge both Sheffield Wednesday and Derby with regards to this, that they felt it wasn't at a fair price, but the clubs defended successfully those charges when it went to arbitration.
Okay, we've just got one more question left, Kieran, so we probably will go over the hour slightly, so we'll only owe Guy a small apology. Sometimes after this pod, it's like the scene in Oliver Twist with the Beadles waiting at the end of a hall, and Kieran and I have to approach him in our tattered rags and explain why we went over the hour. And Guy explains that we're not getting any extra gruel this week, which implies that we get gruel in the first place. And now we've just gone over the hour, so that will teach me. Phil Gandy as our last question. Phil says, again, you recently discussed prize money for the Champions League on your pod, and although my team Tranmere are a million miles from that, it got me wondering about other prize money and TV income. When Tranmere do well in the FA Cup, Papa John's Trophy, etc., when do they actually get the money from progressing through the rounds and being on TV?
I contacted our very good friend Andy Holt of Accrington Stanley to get the perfect answer, and Andy said it's effectively you get rewarded as you go through the competition, which he said, which in our case in the last few years has been nowhere. So thanks to Andy for answering that one for us. So it is effectively as you go through the FA Cup, because there are set amounts, you get them as you progress through the tournament.
So that really is a handy source of income then. It's not a cliche when commentators talk about a cup run potentially saving a club's financial year. That's the case. They're getting the money as they go.
Yeah, brilliant. And I think that will probably be the same for TV, because the amounts paid by the TV companies are set out in advance.
Oh, okay. But the TV companies are not paying the clubs direct though, so they'll be
right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they pay direct to the organisation hosting the competition.
Yeah.
So either the EFL or the Football Association.
Okay. Well, thank you to everyone who has recently become a patron of the pod through our Patreon site, and that includes Randy with a Y. That's 2 mentions. That's what you get for being a Patreon, Randy with a Y. Richard Singleton, Peter Adolfsson Lerman, Peter Bowles, and Tom Greatorex, Vice Chair of the Football Supporters Association, who says, thank you for a consistently brilliant pod. Shining a light into the dark corners of how football is run is invaluable to all who love the game. Keep up the good work, which is exactly how we feel about the brilliant work of the Football Supporters Association. So thank you for that, Tom. And if you'd like to join those people and become a patron of the pod, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. Patreon.com/Price of Football is where you need to go. And if you have any questions for our next questions pod, which will be a week today, it's questions@priceoffootball.com. And we will be back on Thursday when Tottenham, Everton and Palace fans will all be hoping we'll be discussing how much their new manager is going to cost them. In the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire, who's very happy with his manager, to say his customary farewell.
Well, once again, folks, thanks for all the feedback. If you're enjoying the show, if you could give us 5 stars on that purple icon representing Apple. We don't understand why it works, but here I producer guy assures me that is the case. And again, thanks for your support on Patreon. It's for as little as £1 a month. It just helps us to keep getting the show. And other than that, look after yourselves and come on, England.
The price of football. The price of football.